we were anti-white, deeply anti-white. You know, and it was the black nationalism and the anti-whiteness of young people who suddenly realized the magnitude of the injustice done to your people.
Right.
And we're all black people at a black university, and why should we like white people?
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. Just to say, because the black nationalism you're talking about is also different from the way it's seen or most easily interpreted right now, right? Because
No, it's not Afrocentrism. We see it was revolutionary nationalism. It was different than cultural nationalism, which you would get with Malana Karenga, Molefe Asante, and some, that whole school of Egyptologists. We were not that.
Right.
In fact, we saw them as counter-revolutionaries. We were nationalists of the type of the freedom fighters in Southern Africa.
Right. Yes.
You know, we were nationalists who believed in many ways that our struggle was here to topple the American government.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And no, we were not cultural. Although we identified with Africa, but not in a narrow cultural sense.
Yeah.
And see, we had two presidents of African nations that graduated from Lincoln, Kwame Nkrumah and Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria. So we're looking up to them. And Kwame Nkrumah is this radical nationalist, and while we're there, he's overthrown. We're bitter about that. We're bitter about U.S. imperialism, which is the white man, and frankly, it is not until I joined the Communist Party that I began to reconcile and see a possibility of a unity with white people.
Right.
We were anti-Vietnam War, but we would not join the protests because they were white.
Okay, we have questions on this, and this is a really good. Well, because also I just think it's deep that basically you ran on a unity ticket.
Yeah, with the Africans.
With the Africans, because it's a sense of, okay, there's actually a world struggle, and the struggle is against American imperialism. Okay, so I think now we want to know a little bit more about your political participation in your early 20s, like before you joined the Communist Party. And so, I guess in the same way that like John and Erica Huggins decided that they were going to move to California and become part of the Black Panther Party, after, like, as you were finishing up your time in Lincoln, what were your next steps and how are you thinking about what was to come?
Well, graduating from Lincoln, I get a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship to study political science at the University of Chicago, which was then, and I think still remains, one of the top political science departments in the academic bourgeois sense in the country. So I'm excited to go to Chicago. I didn't know Chicago. Frankly, I only knew Philadelphia really that much. And so this was going to be another adventure. And but the summers before that, I was involved as the freedom movement moved north. So the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee set up an office around 17th and Lombard, 16th and Lombard. And we would all go there often. We would see these very famous civil rights activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, like James Foreman, Stokely Carmichael, Rap Brown. And so there were already a lot of activists who had been involved in protests at Girard College, who were a part of Cecil B. Moore's protest, and they had many names and really stellar young people. They were rather than use their full names, like they would say one was named Freedom George, or Freedom Smitty, or Freedom whatever, you know what I'm saying? And they were these young militants, beautiful, beautiful people. And I, being a college student and only here in the summer, they were here all the time. And they were prepared to sacrifice everything, to shut the Mummers Parade down, to enforce, to shut the Trailways buses down, for all kinds of reasons. They were the activists. Cecil B. Moore was the symbol and leader, but they were the on-the-ground revolutionaries. And this is the way they saw themselves. And they were so sweet and so kind. The one that I remember most is Freedom George Brower. And he died all too young. I don't know whatever happened. But it was in this period of those summers that I became familiar with and connected to members of the Revolutionary Action Movement. And began to think about the possibility of insurrectionary violence. Because we'd been reading Mao, we'd been reading about Fidel, we knew there was an armed struggle in Southern Africa, and everywhere we looked, there was no nonviolent movement, everything was an armed struggle. So how could we, who were essentially, as we saw, the colonized people within the American empire, why should we not follow the path of revolutionaries? Makes all the sense in the world, So Rand comes out of a tradition in the South of black men who took up arms. For instance, in North Carolina and in the South, there was a thing called Deacons for Defense. And they would, whenever the Ku Klux Klan showed up, they would show up armed. Rand comes out, what's his name? Comes out of the leader of the NAACP, I think it is in Monroe, North Carolina. What's his name now? I forget. How could I forget his name?
I know, but he wrote Negroes with Guns, right?
Yeah, Negroes with Guns, yeah.
Okay, let me look it up.
He wrote the book Negroes with Guns.
You can Google.
Yeah. No,
Robert F. Williams?
Robert F. Williams and his wife Mabel Williams. I'm sorry to have forgotten that name. But I never met him. I knew Max Stanford. I knew Playfell Benjamin. I knew, what's his name? The preacher, the SNCC member who set up a school and then became a minister, John Churchville. And it was in this period that we became aware of the Church of the Advocate. Father Paul Washington merges the Church of the Advocate with the Black Power movement, and it becomes a sanctuary for young revolutionaries, quite different from what it is today. So all of this, and so much of it ultimately is centered in North Philadelphia, but that's where I become aware of these other possibilities, and that there were actually people in New York, and of course New York was this exotic, place where, all the real revolutionaries were, because that's where Malcolm X was, and you had all of this going on. So people in New York were coming down here, and there was Ram in New York, there was Queen Mother Moore. So it was all of this, and Max Stanford. So I became enthralled with this idea and this possibility. And so the summer that I graduate from Lincoln, of course, I'm back in Philly. I think I had some kind of job, which didn't require a lot. So my evenings were spent hanging around revolutionaries. And so that is how the FBI, which was monitoring us from the elementary school across the street from where the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Office, was, the FBI was, and it's ironic that my oldest daughter eventually ends up going to that elementary school, and then of course, infiltrators or people they can compromise. So I'm in Chicago. I just got in this little studio apartment, and I was, very excited to begin this new academic journey. So before classes began, and I got my apartment together, and it didn't even have room for a bed. In fact, the bed was in a closet, and you pulled it down. But it was all good. You know what I'm saying? That's the way I want to live. I don't want to live too good, So one evening I decide that I was going to go around to Mosque number 2 of the Nation of Islam. No, not Miriam.
Oh.
Mosque number 2.
Oh, right, yeah.
And because I'd read this book by N.C.N. Udom called Black Nationalism, which was a study of the structure, the organization and structure of the Nation of Islam. And of course, being in Philly, there's so many members of the Nation of Islam, so I'm going to go to Mosque number 2. I'd never gone to a Nation of Islam mosque. So I go there. It's a very small place. I guess at most it sat about 60 people. And so I'm sitting there, and my cousin, who is older than me, we called him Junior. He comes, and one of the brothers come and tap me on the shoulder and says, somebody wants you outside. So I go out, and my cousin says, hey, Tony, the police are looking for you. Yeah. Now I'm 21. So you all see how skinny I was, and how I was just a skinny little boy, man. I was really a kid, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I said, what? So he said, yeah, the FBI and police are looking for you. It's all over the news. So the first thing I do is call my professor from Lincoln, who is now at Roosevelt University in Chicago. He's also a lawyer. And I say, Dr. Hamilton, I need your help. The police are looking for me, and what should I do? He said, where are you? I told him where I was. He came. He said, look, I would advise you to turn yourself in, which I did.
This is in Philly.
No, this is in Chicago.
And you were told the charges.
Pardon me?
Your cousin told you the charges that.
No, he didn't say what the charges were. I had no idea. So I go there, they book me in, and they put me in a cell. I'd never been in jail, ever. And I'm there, I don't know what I'm charged with, what's happening at all. And I think I may have been in jail there for a day or two. And then the police and the FBI come and get me, transport me to the airport and back to Philadelphia. While I'm on the plane, they have a black detective from Philadelphia, whom I used to see off and on during the struggle. And he was trying to get information from me. Do you know this one? Do you know the other one? And I said, no, I don't know these people. Pretty much I don't think I did. And so when I get to Philadelphia, I'm handcuffed and all of that. They take me to the roundhouse down here around 8th and Race. And and they're taking me through, and here's my father. When he saw me, breaks down, crying. This is the son they had such hope for, and they knew what I was charged with, because by this time it's all over the news.
Oh, okay.
But it was me and 3 others. Actually, it turned out to be 4 others, but 4 of us were charged. One guy who was, I guess you could call him a snitch, or an agent all the time, or a person who was compromised because he had charges. And they told him if he, I'm speculating because I don't know for certain, if he testified against us, that his charges would be dropped. So, I'm arraigned and charged and given bail. I think $30,000. And this is the role of family and church, because the church got behind me. My family, and of course my Lincoln friends and colleagues. And I had an advantage over the other 3 because of this. And I made bail. And my mother said, you're going back to finish your education in Chicago. She never wavered, why did you do this, and all of this. My uncle, who was my mother's brother, he said, by the way, this room was 2 rooms at one time, and that was his room over there. And for him, it was a kind of a joke. He said, you went from giving a speech on Flag Day at Independence Hall about how much you love your flag, and now you try to overthrow the government. And he would always say, I love my flag. And and I did give that speech at Independence Hall, how much I love the flag. And 5 years later, here I am, 7 years later, in jail for conspiring to create a riot and poison 1,500 Philadelphia police. Now that could only come from the demented mind of the FBI. Yeah, but anyway, I go back to the University of Chicago. I'm not welcome back to the university in the academic department. It's all white people. And I didn't know how I would navigate and negotiate my way back to the academy.
Because you lost your fellowship because of this.
I would ultimately lose the fellowship. But I did take courses, which, by the way, were very boring. But I did take one with this famous German political scientist named Leo Strauss.
Oh, wow.
You've heard of him?
Yeah.
Who became one of the fathers of neoconservatism. But then,
No, perfect.
But then at the same time I meet a man who is 15 years older than me. He's also a student in political science named Robert Rhodes. He's a committed Marxist and a follower of the Soviet Academy of Social Science. And he's also a, how would you describe him? An unusual person, to put it mildly. I can never forget, half of one of his ears was cut off. He was in some kind of car accident.
Wow.
And he always looked so, and he was disheveled all the time. His apartment was always a mess, and he was an alcoholic. out of Ohio. Ohio is known for hard drinking people. And he was light skinned. I felt that, how would any girl ever like you? Too ugly, you know? But, you know, that's the way I. But anyway, he began a Marxist study group in his apartment. And we were reading Das Kapital, all black people. Because, again, we don't like white people, you know? And that study group attracted members of the Black Panther Party, including Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. At this time, I had no intentions of joining the Black Panther Party because of, you know, what I was going through, and I had to take care of that. But I was more committed to ideas, and the Panthers did not seem to be the same thing. Although Fred Hampton was a special person, an intellectual, we were the same age, and he seemed to be a grown man. You know what I'm saying? A real leader. And we were made up of black students from the University of Chicago and community people. And we studied Das Kapital, a reading, you know, loud reading of the text. And it made all the sense in the world to me because I had read the Critique of Pure Reason at Lincoln. And so even up to the day, I consider myself one of the few people, philosophers or not, to have read the Critique of Pure Reason. You know, a lot of people talk about it, but very few had read it. So my coming from Lincoln, having read all his philosophy, I had an advantage over my colleagues. And again, it was very apparent, and Robert, who was older than me, he saw me as the smart person, yada, yada, yada. So after I'm not reinstated. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
Had you also read Hegel by this point?
Pardon me?
Had you read Hegel
No.
at this point?
No. I only knew Hegel through writings of Marxists like those from the Soviet Union. I did not really read Hegel until 2010, The Science of Logic. But I had read Lenin's notebooks on Hegel's Science of Logic, and I was winging it by reading the Soviet writers. Now, let me just say this, and I think I would be fair to say it. Robert Rhodes, who was in his early period, a great teacher for us. But he had not read Kant or Hegel. But if you ask him, he had to say he had read it. No, you hadn't. You know what I'm saying? But he too was completely dependent upon Soviet philosophers. And of course, Lenin's notebooks on Hegel's Science of Logic. But I hadn't read it either. I knew Kant, I knew Descartes, but I was not going to take on this complicated work. Turns out that Science of Logic is not as complicated or difficult as the Critique of Pure Reason. But I didn't know it, you know. But then life was pushing me away from philosophy and towards political theory and political practice, you know. And by this time, I felt I knew enough philosophy to carry me over. And I shifted to political economy. Das Kapital, Lenin's imperialism, matter of fact, all 4 volumes of Das Kapital, all 4 volumes, because at this point I'm feeling that Marx is what needs to be known. I didn't know Du Bois. At Lincoln, we never discussed Du Bois. I had tried to read his final autobiography, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to read it. Certainly, I did not know Black Reconstruction. I did not know the souls of Black folk. And we assumed, without saying it, that universal knowledge comes out of the Western tradition and ultimately Marx. And Robert Rhodes enforced or upheld such a position. And since he was the mentor, well, Robert knows what he's talking about. He trivialized Du Bois as a Black thinker about the Black situation and not about the world situation. Now, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, interesting how things turned out. Go ahead, Tom.
So, Robert and I think in the summer of 1968, we devote ourselves to trying to find a theory based on Das Kapital to talk about the colonial economy and the colonial political economic relationships between Black folk and the American system. Maybe we made headway, I don't know. The idea of an internal colony was very strong at that time, and that the Black struggle was an anti-colonial struggle. But it allowed us to dig deeper into Das Kapital. And we would spend our days trying to do this kind of study. Eventually, I have to come back to Philadelphia and stand trial. My lawyer was not Cecil B. Moore directly, but one of his partners. And it was almost a no-brainer that the state did not have a case. It was complete nonsense. I'm allowed to then go free. But then, what do I do with my life? I can't get a job. I'm luckier than anybody because I have my mother and I can stay at this house. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, you don't need much. So I spend my time teaching other people. So I have friends from Lincoln. One of my good friends who lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. His name is Tony Hewlin, and he had recently married a young woman from Philly, and they're living in Harrisburg.
This is 69.
I think it's 69, yes. And I set up a study group up there on Marxism. And I also joined a group of brothers here in Philly in the Brotherhood House. And I'm teaching on Sundays and other days, I think, political economy, philosophy, and 20th century history. I really remember the 20th century history class because I was using a 2-volume work by D.F. Fleming called The Cold War and Its Origins. But I would also be using a lot of Soviet books and a lot of Soviet material. Ultimately, the brothers at the Brotherhood House asked me to leave. Yeah, because they said, well, their mission was to do this or to help the community, and I think they felt I was bringing bad publicity to them.
This was at Strawberry Mansion.
This was in Strawberry Mansion. So I didn't take it personally. I don't think I took it personally. I just left, you know. And then I set up another study group here in Philadelphia. This is all ultimately leading to the Communist Party. And this is at the same time then that I meet, I don't know who it was particularly, may have been Nur al-Din's story, I'm not certain, who says that there's going to be a youth conference in Chicago. And I think this would be in 1970. Now, the question I can't get straight is, when did we have that meeting of black youth with Henry Winston? I think it was before the founding conference of the Young Workers' Liberation League, but I can't, or maybe it was after, perhaps it was after, it'd make more sense to have been afterwards. Winnie invites a group of young black people to meet with him over a 2-day period in Chicago. And that was the first time I met him. Basically, this is the first time I met black communists. And that was the deciding thing. Along with the fact that the Soviet Union was supporting the African independence movements. You know what I'm saying? This made all the difference in the world, because I, for one, would never establish relationships with white people that were not principled. And if there were people like Winston, and then Ishmael Flory, and we met others who could enforce a principled relationship with white people, it was practical. And then, of course, the lure of the great Soviet Union. You want me to go further?
No, before, that's really the biggest chunk of questions that we have.
Oh, in this period,
But just one thing I also wanted to cover, connected to your arrest, and this was also COINTELPRO. That was
I would say so.
and just this, the 60s was also the decade of assassinations. You had JFK, Medgar Evers in 63, then Malcolm in 65, I think.
65.
And then the biggest one of King, the assassination of King, and after that RFK. So I mean, all of this is also there's an evolving picture of the state, the deep state in particular, and how it basically goes about infiltrating these organizations and obstructing revolutionary struggles. So yeah, I wanted, if you could talk a little bit about that and basically how it shaped how you see the American state and its role, agenda even today. And also your personal experience with it. I mean, yeah, not just losing a fellowship, but finding it hard to work because of this frivolous arrest.
Well, let me tell you this. I never felt bitter. I thought it was a commission to do more.
Right.
And it was also the time when the cities were going up in flames every summer. These were huge uprisings. Even if people suspected an act of police brutality or murder, it would not take anything for there to be a riot or an uprising. And these would last for days. And black people would stand off with guns on one side, usually in high-rise projects or wherever, and go to war with the police. So much so that the military and the National Guard had to be brought in. This was, the famous ones are Watts, 1965, Philadelphia, 1964, Newark, Detroit. Oh God, these were serious battles. Every summer, up until 1970. And each side, it would seem, would be preparing the blacks and the police for long, hot summers, Now, all of this talk of white vigilantes and what they were going to do. They weren't going to do nothing. You understand? I say that because, you know, they got a lot of big willy talk that they enter into. But these young black men and women, especially young black men, would arm themselves in preparation for an urban uprising. This further convinced me and others that we could win the cities, we could take the cities back by force of arms and transform them into black liberated areas. That's the way we thought. Now, from an imagine, it was a possibility. It was a possibility because, I mean, like you take Detroit, I mean, it would be these battles would end up with 50, 60 people killed. That's how intense they were. And it wasn't all on one side. We were killing the police. You know what I'm saying? And so these were pitched battles and burning down areas, commercial areas where, you know, mainly white people ran the stores and so on. But these were called long, hot summers. And it's hard for you all to think of this, but people, young black people would prepare for these battles. And when they threw down in Watts, in LA, in Detroit, Cleveland, especially that and Chicago, that industrial Midwest, that black proletariat, they threw down. And then when King was assassinated, over 160 cities went up in flames. You know what I'm saying? That was the level of intensity. And, you know, I'm living through all this. I'm not going to join the Panthers because this time I think they're a little reckless, you know, do they know what they're doing? But they had some serious run-ins with the police. Huey Newton had been charged with killing a cop, and he was on trial, and there was this movement, free Huey and all political prisoners. Frankly, when I heard the slogan, I didn't even fully understand what a political prisoner was at that time. And then Huey beats his case in 1970, and Angela is arrested in 1970. And Henry Winston architects this movement, the likes of which the world had never seen, in the fight for the freedom of a political prisoner. And this international movement. And by 1972, we free Angela. And Angela's such a heroic revolutionary. She comes out of prison and agrees to run as vice president with Gus Hall on the Communist Party ticket. By the way, the same year I run for Congress here in Philadelphia. But she was very courageous. And yeah, but I think, that's why you have to call this period a Third American Revolution. And the Black Power movement, the urban uprisings, the civil rights movement, they're all a part of a single cloth.